Frank Tolliver walked through Gresham Pines Plaza with a limp and a cap that said more about him than he ever would. The coffee shop had just switched to holiday cups, red and white with a little silhouette of a reindeer, and the clerk behind the counter was already done with the day. She tapped the screen harder than necessary as Frank counted out exact change into his weathered palm. 3 quarters, 2 dimes, a nickel, no words, just a faint metallic clink as he placed the coins down. The clerk sighed, not a huff, not dramatic, just the kind of tired exhale reserved for people you've decided don't matter. Frank didn't flinch. He stood straight, shoulders slightly rounded with age, but still squared in the way men trained to hold rifles never fully let go. The girl slid his black coffee across the counter without a thank you. Someone further back in line mumbled, "These guys just want a warm place to sit." Frank turned slowly and walked away without reaction. The aroma of burnt espresso and floor wax hung in the air as he passed the pastry case, the early shoppers, the blinking neon 50% off Veterans Day sale signs. He stopped when he spotted a crumpled flyer near the cafe entrance. Without hesitation, he bent and picked it up. Veterans Breakfast, Saturday 10 a.m., Community Room. He smoothed the paper with care, flattening its corners with fingers marked by time and weather. No one else looked twice. At the adjacent counter of the security kiosk, Officer Dean Morley stirred sugar into his own coffee. His uniform was crisp, badge newly shined, shoes still lacking scuffs. He wasn't there for mall patrol, just a quick break. As he stirred, his eyes lingered on the old man's cap, faded olive green, but the insignia was unmistakable, a black patch embroidered with yellow thread. 9th Infantry Division, Old Reliables. Dean knew the design from the box under his grandfather's bed. He didn't say anything, just watched quietly. Frank made his way toward the hallway bench near the donut shop. It had been his spot for weeks now, set just to the side of the main corridor, out of the way, but near enough to feel the rhythm of the place. He settled in with the kind of patience that didn't care about schedules anymore. Across the plaza, Brett stood with arms crossed, surveying the floor, 52 years old, silver at the temples, a belly held in by posture and pride. When he spotted Frank, his lips pulled sideways. "Still keeping that bench warm, huh?" Brett said loud enough for the nearby cafe patrons to hear. Frank looked up, blinked once, then tipped his cap without a word. "You know this is a fire lane, right?" Brett continued, motioning to an invisible boundary. "People need to pass through here, not park their personal history lessons." Clara Jensen, head of security, stood nearby watching. She didn't step in, she never did with Brett. She had a binder full of policies and no energy for the gray areas. Frank rose slowly. No complaint. No eye contact. He collected his coffee, smoothed his coat, and walked further down the corridor. He found another bench, one without armrests, and sat with his coffee cooling between his palms. Dean passed him again on the way out. He paused near the door to his patrol car, glanced back, and lingered just for a moment. He watched Frank fold his napkin into a precise triangle and place it under the coffee cup like a soldier still setting his mess kit. The old man looked out across the hallway, expression unreadable. Dean's hand hovered over the door handle. He was supposed to be back in 15 minutes, but something about the man's stillness rooted him in place. When the young mother collapsed, everyone froze except Frank. The toddler's cry cut through the gentle murmur of the afternoon crowd, sharp and raw, followed by the hollow thud of a body hitting the tiled floor near the entrance. A woman crumpled to one side, her grocery bag spilling fruit and boxed cereal in chaotic arcs. For a split second, the hallway paused, like the moment before a dropped plate shatters. People looked, but no one moved. Frank was already on his feet. He didn't run, didn't shout. He moved with that precise economical stride Dean had noticed before, the kind that didn't waste time asking permission. Frank reached the woman just as her arm gave out beneath her. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. The toddler screamed beside her, his cheeks wet with confusion and fear. Frank knelt slowly, placing one hand behind her neck to steady it, the other reaching into his coat. He pulled out a clean handkerchief, worn but folded with military precision, and gently placed it under her head. Then he eased her legs up, using her own empty tote bag as a prop, adjusting her angle to help circulation. All the while he kept his head low and movements calm, just enough to stabilize her, never enough to alarm. The crowd stayed where they were, eyes wide, hands hovering over phones recording, but not helping. A young retail clerk from the shoe store finally stepped forward to dial 911, voice shaking as she described the scene. Frank glanced briefly at the child and gave a small, tired smile. "Mama's just resting," he said softly, voice low and gravelly. The boy hiccuped a sob, inching closer to his mother's side. By the time Clara arrived, radio crackling, Frank was gone. 2 EMTs knelt beside the woman as Clara scanned the scene. She spotted the child, now clinging to a stuffed bear a stranger had offered, and turned to one of the paramedics. "Status." "She's dehydrated, likely low blood sugar," the older EMT said, unwrapping a BP cuff. "Stable now." But if it weren't for whoever helped, he knew what he was doing. Basic trauma position, head support was textbook. Clara blinked. "He was gone by the time we got here, old guy." "I think moved like he'd done this before." Clara turned towards the entrance, eyes narrowing. By the time she reached the security office, Brett was already inside, hunched over the monitors. He hit the rewind button with force, then jabbed at the spacebar to pause. The grainy footage played back in bursts, the woman falling, the toddler panicking, and then Frank entering the frame. "Found our loiterer," Brett muttered. Clara leaned in. "He helped her." "Helped her," Brett scoffed. "Maybe. Or maybe he set it up. Create the problem, solve the problem. Look like a hero, classic tactic." Clara stared at the screen. "That's a stretch." Brett shrugged. "Don't care, doesn't belong here. That's enough." He clicked open a file and began drafting an internal memo. Next time he shows up, he gets a formal warning. No more warnings after that. Meanwhile, in the parking lot, Dean sat in his cruiser, finishing the last of his coffee. He tapped his finger against the paper cup, unsure why the knot in his stomach hadn't eased. He replayed the earlier scene in his mind, then opened the video link Clara had sent him from her tablet. Frame by frame, he watched Frank's hands, how he placed the head support, how he lifted the legs just so, how he checked the pulse discreetly. It wasn't panic, it was training. Dean didn't say anything. He just closed the file and sat in silence, listening to the white noise of light drizzle returning to the windshield. Inside, Frank had quietly returned to the side corridor near the donut shop. His bench had been taken, so he settled near the vending machine beside the outer entrance. Before he sat, he noticed a stroller on its side near the planter. Its contents had been scooped back inside, but it leaned crookedly. Without a word, he righted it, gave the wheels a check, adjusted the brake, and then lowered himself to the bench. Slowly, knees resisting more than usual. "Today." Clara spotted him from inside. She stepped through the glass doors, folding her arms. "You're going to need to move along," she said, voice firm but less cold than usual. Frank looked up, no anger, no surprise. He gave her a small nod, stood without protest, and adjusted his coat. He walked toward the edge of the plaza where the sidewalk met the damp curb, then paused under the slight overhang of the roofing. The rain had started again, light but persistent, tracing long paths down his shoulders. Dean pulled his car around slowly and parked across from where Frank stood. He stayed in the vehicle, hands on the wheel. Eyes narrowed. His gaze caught something on Frank's cap, a shape dulled by time and rain. A patch frayed at the edges, but still clear, the black and yellow emblem of the 9th Infantry Division 1. Froze, his grandfather's photo album had the same symbol on half its pages. Dean spots a detail on Frank's cap, a worn 9th Infantry badge his grandfather used to point at in old photos. Dean couldn't shake the look in Frank's eyes, like a soldier waiting for orders that would never come. He'd seen that same expression once before, in an old photo his grandfather kept beside the fireplace. A black and white shot of men kneeling in mud, faces hardened. Not from anger, but from knowing too much, one of them, his grandfather had whispered. Never blinked, Dean always thought it was just a story. Until now, the wind had picked up since the sun dipped below the edge of the hills. The flags lining the plaza snapped more sharply now, casting flickers of motion against the mall's brick facade. Inside cafe lights flickered to life, giving the windows a sheen like soft amber. Frank sat near the outer bench again, beneath the overhang, where the sidewalk curved gently toward the rear parking lot. From inside the mall, he was almost invisible, a shape half shadow, half statue, unmoving as the wind played with the hem of his jacket. Dean parked in the far corner of the lot, where he usually lingered between shifts. He'd told dispatch he was monitoring foot traffic, which was technically true. What he hadn't said was that he wasn't watching just anyone. He stepped out of the cruiser, reached into the glove box, and withdrew a small canvas-wrapped bundle, his grandfather's flag, folded heavy, in the way that only something full of memory could be. As he approached the flag under his arm, Dean didn't speak at first. He sat quietly, at the other end of the bench, giving space. Frank didn't look over, just watched the wind stir a fallen napkin near the curb. 9th Infantry, Dean asked, voice low. Frank's head turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes tracked a group of teenagers across the lot, laughing as they tossed a football toward a parked SUV. 9th was cold, Frank said finally. Rainy, full of ghosts. Dean let the silence sit between them for a few seconds longer. Then he nodded, mostly to himself. My grandfather served there too, said the cold stuck to your bones, even years after Frank gave the smallest of nods. Inside, Clara exited the corridor leading from the security office. She spotted them both on the bench, Dean leaning forward slightly, Frank still and statuesque. Something about the way Dean's posture had changed caught her attention. It wasn't casual. It wasn't enforcement. It was deferential. She slowed her pace as she approached, not interrupting, just observing Brett. However, had no such restraint. He barreled through the double doors with the usual swagger, clipboard in hand, jacket unzipped. Here we go again, he muttered. Clara, we filing this or what? She turned slightly. Filing what? Trespass notice, got the draft ready. You know, mall management's been getting complaints. Guys always there makes folks uncomfortable. Dean turned his head, jaw tightening. Brett added, can't have people thinking this is a halfway house. Frank stood up slowly, not in protest, not in anger, just as someone trained to move with purpose. He brushed his coat down and turned to leave Sergeant Tolliver. Dean's voice cut through the air, like a bell, clear, crisp, reverent. Frank paused mid-step, slowly, deliberately. He turned. Dean stood. He shifted the bundle under one arm, lifted his chin, and with an ease born of practice, snapped to attention. His right hand rose in a clean line to his temple. Fingers tight, palm turned properly, every inch of him respectful. Frank didn't move for a long moment, but something in his eyes shifted. The weariness peeled back just slightly, revealing something sharper underneath, like a blade still sheathed but not forgotten. The plaza goes silent. A woman near the coffee stand drops her drink. Brett shouts, "What are you doing?" But Dean doesn't flinch. Frank didn't salute back, but his eyes locked with Dean's for a beat too long, and the world around them simply paused. The Oregon wind tugged at the flags lining the walkway, making them snap and fold in slow motion, as if nature itself had leaned in to watch. The overhead speakers, usually drowned out by chatter, and footsteps hummed faintly with the instrumental strains of America, the Beautiful. No one moved. Dean stood, as if carved from something older than time, his hand still raised in crisp salute, eyes unwavering. For a man barely out of academy training, he carried the posture of someone who understood reverence in its rawest form. Frank remained still. The breeze tugged at the brim of his cap. His face didn't change, but something behind his gaze shifted. An old awareness stirred, the kind honed not from medals or ceremonies, but from years of being forgotten without ever being gone. From a few steps behind, Clara exhaled slowly. "What the hell is happening?" she whispered. Not to anyone in particular, but she didn't move. Didn't stop it. A murmur rippled through the crowd, forming like an accidental congregation. People had turned away from storefronts and phone screens. Parents hushed children without knowing why. A barista peered through the glass, one hand frozen over a steaming milk pitcher. Maribel broke through the murmuring edge, her stride urgent but controlled. Her son, maybe 4 or 5, clung to her hand, his sneakers squeaking against the polished tile. She stopped when she saw Frank, her eyes wide, recognition rushing in. "That's him," she said aloud, voice thick. "That's the man who helped me." Frank blinked, barely nodding, but the movement was enough. The boy looked up at his mother, then walked forward on tentative feet. From under his coat, he pulled a small juice box, apple slightly crinkled, and held it up to Frank like it was the only thing in the world he had to offer. Frank accepted it with a hand that trembled slightly. He said nothing. Nearby, 2 older men sitting at the bench beneath the shade trees had gone quiet. One leaned toward the other, whispering, "Tolliver." "Couldn't be," the other replied, the Tolliver from 9th. Neither took their eyes off him. Dean's arm had started to ache, but he didn't lower it. Not until Frank finally nodded, not out of obligation, not as a return salute, but as something quieter and heavier. A message between soldiers spoken without sound. Dean dropped his hand slowly, deliberately. Clara's phone was in her palm before she realized it. She didn't lift it high, didn't aim for a perfect frame. She just tapped record and let it run for a few seconds. Not to post, not for proof, just to remember. Behind them, the mall speakers shifted, the music transitioned seamlessly into "God Bless America," and for once, no one talked over it. Brett stood stiffly by the kiosk. His face, usually flushed with confidence, had gone pale and then red again. With a muttered curse, he turned, shoved the mall door open, and disappeared inside the metal frame, clattering behind him. From a nearby table, someone mutters, "Why is he sitting alone on Veterans Day weekend?" The silence now carries weight. At Gracie's diner, the eggs were over easy, the toast slightly burned, and the man everyone ignored yesterday was suddenly the name on every whisper. It was Saturday morning, and the rain had let up just enough for the light to cut through the clouds in thin, respectful shafts. Inside the diner, the smell of bacon fat, burnt toast, and fresh coffee blended into something warm and familiar. The booths were all full, mostly with locals in windbreakers and worn flannel. The kind of people who'd lived in Gresham long enough to know everyone by voice, if not by name. Clara Jensen walked in with her coat still damp at the shoulders. Her boots squeaked on the tile as she hesitated near the doorway. A waitress named Fran gave her a quick nod, recognizing her, but not interrupting. It wasn't the kind of morning for chit-chat. She spotted Frank sitting alone at a booth near the window. Same cap, same coat, same stillness. But now heads turned when she approached, just a bit. Not out of disrespect, but recognition, Clara clutched a black ceramic mug filled with coffee. She didn't ask if he wanted it. She simply placed it in front of him quietly. "My dad served too," she said. After a moment, her voice softer than usual. "I forgot how to remember him right." Frank looked at her, not surprised but present. He nodded once, then reached into the inside pocket of his coat and carefully withdrew a folded newspaper. The headline read, "Local Hero Saved in 1971. To Survive Mortar Attack in Da Nang." He slid it toward her. She read the headline, then the faded names in the subheader. One of them was Frank Tolliver. A few booths over, an older man in a blue ball cap stopped mid-chew. His fork hovered over a pile of eggs. "Tolliver," he said, voice cracking slightly. Frank looked up. "Frank Tolliver," the man asked again. A second man beside him, a little heavier with a Marine Corps ring and a cough that hadn't left him in 20 years, turned. "You pulled me out when that mortar hit," he said, voice suddenly hoarse. "You had a busted shoulder and still carried me like I was a damn suitcase." The first man, Ralph, wiped at his eyes with a napkin. "We thought you didn't make it." "Hell. I told my kids you died in country." Frank didn't smile. He simply said, "I'm still making it." Across the diner, a few customers turned to look. No one said a word. The bell above the door jingled as Dean walked in, shoulders stiff from the cold, the familiar canvas-wrapped bundle under his arm. He made his way to Frank's table, without fanfare, then carefully placed a small, worn metal box beside the coffee mug. "My grandfather," Dean said quietly. "He never stopped talking about you." Frank looked down at the box, then at Dean. "He made it home," Dean nodded. "Because of you, there was no cue, no speech, no fanfare. But one by one, Ralph and Joe stood from their booth. Then Frank, then Dean. Each of them stood in silence, no one leading, no one following. Just four men who understood something the rest of the world had long forgotten. No applause followed. Only the quiet sizzle of a fresh batch of hash browns on the griddle. Clara stepped back, blinking hard as she turned toward the exit. Outside, the clouds were beginning to break, leaving streaks of pale blue between the gray. She pulled out her phone, stared at the screen for a long moment, then hit the contact she'd found last night. A dial tone, then a click. This story deserves to be told before Monday. Veterans Day dawned not with fanfare, but with a folded flag resting quietly on Frank's usual bench. The town square outside Gresham Plaza looked different that morning. Not grand, not crowded, just different, like it remembered something important. The autumn breeze carried the faint scent of cinnamon from the pies laid out on folding tables under a white canopy. A speaker on a temporary stand played low orchestral music, patriotic but gentle, the kind that didn't interrupt thoughts, only accompanied them. Frank arrived before the others. Habit, perhaps, or instinct. His bench-worn wood, rusted bolts held a single object, the folded flag resting like a memory, given shape. Tucked beneath it was a small card, handwritten uneven, "You are seen." He stood there for a long while, not reaching for it, not sitting, just looking. Around him, people began to drift in slow. At first, then steady, Dean, already in full dress, blues, helped a volunteer plug in the portable mic. Clara moved between tables with a clipboard, checking names, adjusting tape. Her hair was pulled back, her pace calm and focused. Frank finally sat. He placed the flag gently beside him, hands folded in his lap, eyes scanning the horizon like he used to do at dawn, watching for movement that never came. Maribel and her son arrived together. The boy wore a jacket 2 sizes too big and clutched a small bouquet of grocery store flowers. He waved at Frank. Frank nodded back. Dean stepped up to the mic. "No introduction, no preamble. Some people served in silence," he said. "Today we speak for them." He stepped back. That was all he had to say. Clara followed. She unfolded a worn sheet of paper. "This is a poem my father gave me. He never liked big speeches either." Her voice was steady. "To the man who came home but never stopped walking." To the one who left pieces of himself in places no map can mark, we see you, we thank you, and we remember. She stepped away quickly, blinking toward the ground, Ralph now in full uniform with buttons polished and a small tremor in his hands, walked slowly toward Frank. He said nothing, just reached into his breast pocket and removed a campaign medal from decades past. He pinned it to Frank's lapel above the pocket just below the shoulder seam. Frank touched it once lightly. Then the mayor said a few practiced words about duty and gratitude. He kept it brief, sensing the tone didn't ask for speeches, just presence. Someone gestured for Frank to speak. He didn't rise right away. When he did, he walked to the mic unhurriedly. The breeze lifted the corner of his jacket. "I didn't expect this," he said simply. "I don't need thanks, but I'll carry today with me longer than any medal." He returned to his bench. The applause that followed was soft, like a standing whisper. Respect, not celebration. People began to disperse, chatting quietly, balancing pie plates and paper cups of cider. Maribel's boy left his flowers on the bench beside the flag. Frank sat still. Dean approached quietly, flag in hand, the same one that once lay on his grandfather's casket, now gently returned to another man who had carried so much and asked for so little. He placed it in Frank's lap. Frank pressed it to his chest, ears closed. For the first time in years, Frank Tolliver stayed, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because he had finally been asked to, on a quiet bench in a small town square. A folded flag found its way back to the hands of a man the world had long overlooked. No banners were raised, no parade marched, but something deeper took place, recognition, born not from noise but from understanding. Sometimes the quietest lives carry the loudest truths. A gentle act, unseen by most, can ripple into a chorus of respect when one person dares to truly look. Kindness, it seems, remembers its way home. If this story stirred something in you, consider passing that warmth along to a neighbor, a veteran, or a stranger on the edge of your attention. You never know whose story is waiting to be honored.